Chosen one, come closer. This is not for the faint or the ordinary. This is for the chosen, the called, the ones who carry something sacred that can't be copied, bought, or explained. If you're reading this, it's not by accident. You've been walking through rooms too small for your purpose, dimming your light to keep the peace, letting people close who were never meant to carry your name in their mouths. But that season is over. This space, it's a reckoning, a reminder, a reclamation. You are not common. You are not background noise. You are divine architecture in motion. And here's the truth. No one told you loud enough. Access to you is sacred. Your energy isn't a coupon. Your soul isn't a free trial. And your presence isn't up for negotiation. Today, you remember who you are. The wrong ones tried to sell what they didn't build. They tried to translate your power without knowing the language. They underestimated the cost of touching something anointed without alignment. But don't worry, the tables always turn for the ones who walk with fire in their spirit and truth in their bones. You're not just entering the room anymore. You are the room. Let's begin. Looking for purpose and peace? Hit subscribe and start the journey. They learn to mirror what they cannot generate, borrowing warmth they never nurtured, tapping into a well they never dug. The most intuitively giving hearts are often mistaken for open circuits, ready to be accessed without cost or conscience. Not because they're loved, but because their presence softens rooms and quiets storms. The betrayal doesn't wear a villain's face. It hides behind grins, alliances, and fake safety. What's taken isn't just attention, but sacred proximity. They invite strangers into that sacred field, hoping proximity buys influence, thinking reflection is the same as origin. Connections are handed out like keycards to a vault, not because trust was earned, but because your spirit became a bargaining chip in relationships that never had your name on them. And while you carry the weight of clarity, they negotiate pieces of your peace to secure their own image. What enters uninvited distorts the frequency. The aftermath? Not poetic justice, but a full systemic collapse. Where your presence once steadied them, now absence echoes. What was propped up by borrowed glow shatters under the weight of divine withdrawal. No one plays architect with sacred geometry and walks away untouched. The same hands that opened doors without consent now tremble as the foundation buckles. You weren't theirs to leverage. And the cost of trespassing isn't just exile, it's reconstruction, demanded by a force beyond denial. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. Some think removing a cornerstone means the whole structure will collapse, but they forget some are made of bedrock, not brick. They whisper your name into the hands of chaos, hoping the tremors reach you first. They introduce shadows, mask sabotage as coincidence, and cloak envy in concern. It's not about watching you rise, it's about orchestrating your fall and applauding from a safe distance. What slips through their fingers is the knowing. You are never walking blind. Every twist in the dark, every misstep designed behind curtains, is already accounted for by a higher rhythm. While they anticipate your undoing, believing disruption equals defeat, something quieter is happening. Your roots deepen. The friction they engineer becomes your forge. What was meant to scatter your essence becomes the ground where new strength settles. They stare, confused, as your silence becomes strategy, your pain becomes instruction. They don't know that grace often hides in the unraveling. Where they expected you to fracture, you establish foundations. They thought they'd designed your downfall, but miscalculated. The blueprint was never theirs to read. Now, with every attempted detour, they only expand the path meant for you. Their tactics echo back, not as triumph, but as lessons they can no longer outrun. What they tried to bury becomes a wellspring. And while they scramble to make sense of the reversal, you stand firm. Not because nothing touched you, but because everything that did only sharpened your shape. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. Some confuse proximity with possession, mistaking sacred alignment for shared ownership. They act as if your inner world is an open market, handing out invitations to people who carry more wounds than wisdom, more agendas than alignment. Without discernment, they throw open the gates, assuming your warmth is a public utility, your intuition an open bar for every wandering soul. They don't pause to question what kind of energy they're mixing into your orbit. They only see what they can gain through your glow. They pass your name around like a shortcut, not realizing they're exposing something consecrated to contamination. Conversations are offered without your consent. Connections are formed in your name, but not in your interest. And before you realize it, people who've never earned the right to witness your growth are planting seeds in your soil. What they unleash isn't just discomfort, it's imbalance. Disruption enters quietly, but its residue lingers. The ones who cracked open access start experiencing disarray they can't trace. Circumstances shift, harmony fractures. The ground under their feet turns unfamiliar. They thought they were offering introductions. What they actually did was trespass through a realm they didn't understand. The space they played with isn't casual. It's encoded, protected, and alive. And when a frequency this guarded is violated, it doesn't retaliate with noise. It responds with a shift. Suddenly, their luck fades, their plans unravel, and the energy they borrowed turns against them. Not out of vengeance, but balance. When sacred ground is misused, the universe doesn't need to punish. It simply restores the order they disturbed. Some mistake divine presence for stagecraft, convinced they're pulling strings when they're only orbiting brilliance. They script roles you never agreed to play, convinced your purpose bends to their will. What they borrow isn't just your voice, it's your essence, repackaged to build a reputation that can't stand without your silent endorsement. They echo your thoughts, parade your light as proof of their own relevance, and mask their dependency with authority. They assume your restraint is obedience, your calm is compliance. But when you withdraw, what held them together falls apart in slow motion. You weren't performing, you were anchoring. Now, as you retreat, their image flickers. The words no longer land. The crowds grow restless. The shine they borrowed fades without your presence to sustain it. They rush to rewrite the ending, to spin the collapse as choice, not consequence. But the truth resists their edits. You were never their reflection. You were the original. And now that you've stepped outside their illusion, the weight of what was built on borrowed breath begins to implode. What they tried to control was never theirs to shape. The light they mistook for a spotlight was a signal fire, and it was never for them. They act like your essence comes with an open door policy, as if your spirit is a signal they can broadcast whenever it suits their ambitions. They talk like access to you is part of their resume, offering your presence as proof of their reach. Without hesitation, they drop your name in circles that twist intentions, introducing you to dynamics you never asked for. They treat your being like a feature, not a force, as though your gifts are plugins, your energy a tool. They crave what surrounds you, not who you are. And in that hunger, they invite currents into your path that do not carry peace. What enters unchecked begins to drain not just time, but clarity. They never stop to ask if you agree. They assume your essence is shareable. But the presence they mishandle was never theirs to circulate. What was sacred gets distorted, and the cost begins to echo. Systems malfunction, communication breaks, peace becomes brittle. The very people who tried to funnel your presence like a shortcut to validation now find themselves frozen at the door of their own undoing. Because what they accessed wasn't just kindness, it was guarded by design. There are consequences for breaching what is protected. And now, as those doors seal, they finally understand. The connection they exploited came with divine encryption. They tried to distribute a miracle like a memo, and now face the stillness that follows disconnection. Step beyond the screen, join and help light the way for others. Some observe your path like it's a formula to replicate, mistaking depth for a recipe and sacred growth for a manual they can hand out. They study your evolution and reduce it to steps, convinced that mimicking your scars grants them your strength. In their arrogance, they give directions to others, offering a shortcut to what you cultivated through storms they never walked through. What they ignore is that the core of your journey is encrypted. No matter how closely they trace the route, they miss what was never meant to be visible. The foundations were built under pressure they cannot simulate. At altitudes, their lungs aren't built to breathe in. They distribute details like keys, unaware that the true entry points are sealed with covenant. Those they lead toward what they don't understand arrive confused, disoriented, and energetically fractured. What they thought was a map becomes a maze. Their peace slips, their clarity frays, and their intentions start turning inward against them. The very path they tried to commercialize becomes the one that convicts. They don't just mishandle mystery, they offend what they were never assigned to touch. Now what looked like favor turns into interference. Systems freeze, guidance fades. What once felt magnetic becomes hostile. Because when imitation tries to access what was consecrated through cost, the response isn't reward, it's resistance. Not out of malice, but divine preservation. Some gates remain invisible until the imitator tries to enter. Then they realize the blueprint was never for sale. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. They misread restraint as weakness, assuming silence is permission. You move gently, without spectacle, so they assume they hold power over your name, your time, your energy. They craft dialogues in rooms you never walk into, using your presence as proof of their credibility. They operate without your consent, promising access they can't actually deliver. Not out of loyalty, but out of arrogance. Because you don't correct them, they think you don't notice. Because you don't fight back, they think you don't carry weight. What they don't understand is you were never trying to be seen. You were being preserved for impact, not performance. While they mock your stillness, the realm you move through begins taking inventory. They borrow from your grace like it's unlimited, leaking your essence into conversations and connections that dilute rather than honor you. They believe your softness is an invitation when it's really a test. And when that threshold is crossed, the atmosphere responds, not with noise, but with shift. One by one, their structures falter. Joy turns to exhaustion. Connections crumble under pressure. They don't just feel chaos, they live in it. And though they'll never say it out loud, somewhere in their core, they know exactly when it started. They disrespected something guarded, and that disrespect rewrote the terms of their reality. Not because you retaliated, but because divine covering does not negotiate with desecration. You didn't need to raise your voice. The silence did it for you. Some stumble into realms they do not understand, assuming calm energy means open access, and sacred presence is for casual use. They don't just approach carelessly, they reach with entitlement, assuming what glows is theirs to touch, twist, or carry. But what they handle isn't ordinary. Beneath the surface lies a calling forged through isolation, discipline, and fire. They look at the exterior and see something approachable, unaware that every layer has been weathered in divine silence. They don't ask if their spirit is aligned, if their hands are clean, or if their presence has permission. They confuse availability with neutrality and pay no mind to the consequence of misalignment. And then, without warning, the shift begins. The ease they once felt around you disappears. Conversations turn heavy. Their clarity dissolves. Relationships they used to rely on start breaking without cause. The divine doesn't always speak. It responds. And when something consecrated is misread as common, the recalibration comes swiftly. Suddenly, what they touched begins unraveling everything around them. They thought they were engaging with a person. They didn't know they crossed into a sacred equation. What they took lightly now echoes through their choices, and the silence they once mocked is now the void they live in. They toss your name into rooms like a shortcut, not realizing the weight of what they're trafficking. It starts as a whisper, a name, a mention, a promise to connect, a suggestion that proximity to you means access to something greater. They use the outline of your presence like a charm, holding it up as proof of status or control. Behind the scenes, they weave your identity into deals, relationships, and plans you never agreed to, all under the illusion that you're a tool they can hand off, a silent advantage to wield. What they don't expect is the backlash, not from you, but from what walks with you. The energy they attempt to trade doesn't bend to manipulation. It scans the intention and responds accordingly. People they bring into your orbit find confusion instead of clarity. Expectations they set fall flat. Deals collapse, trust decays. The very connections they used your name to secure dissolve like mist. Because what they misrepresented wasn't just you, it was the sacred frequency you carry. That frequency rejects being used like bait. And now they watch as the same doors they boasted about begin to slam, one by one. The fallout doesn't need your voice. Your very essence corrected the lie they told. They think they've outplayed the system, welcoming the wrong into spaces meant to heal, not realizing their ambition opens the floodgates. The protection they were trusted with becomes a platform for recklessness. They don't slip up. They make deals. They invite chaos under the guise of collaboration, thinking manipulation will go unnoticed in the name of connection. What walks through isn't accidental, it's chosen. And those choices come bearing toxins. The people they allow in do not bring alignment. They arrive with disruption, hidden behind polished words and practiced smiles. The space once known for peace begins shifting. The air grows heavier. The quiet becomes loud. They've traded your sanctuary for personal gain, and now the consequences move in. The very forces they allowed begin unraveling their lives. The energy is off. Sleep escapes them. Stability collapses. All because what they enabled carries a cost. You were the foundation they thought could carry anything. Now that foundation has sealed itself off. What was once fertile begins to flourish again, but without them. And what they now try to construct crumbles under the weight of betrayal. The breach follows them, not as punishment, but as proof. Sacred space, once defiled, never forgets who left the door open. Some believe proximity to power can replace the path to it. They don't want transformation. They want a ride. Not to walk through the process, but to lean on your elevation, like a shortcut through a locked system. When their own journey stalls, they draw from yours, treating your discipline as a resource and your clarity as a lifeline. They parrot your revelations, echo your discernment, and mistake your lived truth for a script they can repeat. But growth can't be plagiarized, and access isn't granted through mimicry. What they try to pull from you doesn't transfer by touch. The doors they try to walk through by using your identity don't recognize their signature. Over time, they notice the stillness. Insight fades. Answers feel distant. Movement stops. They think the road is blocked by resistance, but it's actually sealed by design. Because divine progression can't be stolen. It must be earned through surrender, through the cost they were unwilling to pay. What once felt like flow now feels like silence. The voice they relied on isn't speaking to them. It's stepping away, and what's left isn't punishment. It's the absence of grace they thought they could borrow forever. Now the path vanishes, and the only way forward is the very process they tried to skip. Step beyond the screen, join, and help light the way for others. They fear what cannot be controlled, so they try to frame it first. When presence is too powerful to dim, the next step is distortion. They paint your image with half-truths, subtle enough to seem like concern, calculated enough to disarm curiosity. They tell others you're incomplete without them, that your growth is dependent, that your balance needs their grip, not to help you, but to build a pedestal they can stand on. They don't want people to see your power. They want people to see their hand in it. They present themselves as necessary architects, while behind the scenes, they chip away at your foundation. Because if you're seen clearly, they're seen less. But truth does not cooperate with fabrication. Time reveals what manipulation tries to hide. The same audience they misled begins noticing inconsistencies. They see you rise in silence, heal without noise, move with clarity they didn't think you had. And suddenly, the lie unravels. It becomes obvious you were never dependent, only respectful. You weren't beneath them, only loyal. What they lose isn't just influence, it's credibility. Because in trying to shrink your truth, they expose the smallness of their own. The same light they tried to block now exposes their shadow. Some act like the unseen is irrelevant, like absence of thunder means absence of consequence. They orchestrate betrayal behind closed curtains, mask cruelty as charm, and weaponize truth in fragments. Confident there will be no reply. They assume that silence means escape, that delay means exemption. But there is a stillness more severe than wrath, the kind that doesn't scream, only removes, and that removal echoes. First in the subtle, the plans that stall, the connections that lose color, the energy that doesn't return. Then, in the soul, the hollow ache that sleep can't fix, the weight in the chest that logic can't lift. It's not random, it's reckoning, not through spectacle, but slow erosion. The lights don't flicker off. They dim until the room feels unfamiliar. Nothing around them explodes, but everything quietly ceases to cooperate. The favor they once tasted vanishes without warning, and they call it coincidence. They rationalize, they distract, but deep inside, something whispers. It is not punishment, it is response, a sacred one, a divine withdrawal that honors what they chose to desecrate. There are no ghosts, only the echo of what no longer covers them. They fumble through distractions trying to find the switch, not realizing the source has already moved on. The most piercing judgment isn't loud, it's the absence of divine breath in places where it once lingered. Now they live in that vacancy, haunted not by noise, but by what used to answer. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. Some can't withstand a quiet presence that makes their noise feel hollow. Your energy doesn't have to confront, it reveals. Not by accusation or grand gestures, but by existing in alignment, by holding an internal stillness forged in the places others never dared to enter. You don't expose them, their own spirit does. Around you, the false personas flicker. The masks slip without effort. They mistake your presence for passivity, not realizing it acts as a litmus test for everything unreal. You don't seek to disrupt, but you carry a vibration that makes the inauthentic tremble. They attempt to borrow your tone, repeat your language, echo your peace, but all it does is magnify their dissonance. The disconnection begins to sting. And what do they do with that discomfort? They cast blame. They whisper distortions. They launch subtle attacks, not because you've wronged them, but because you've reflected what they're running from. You never had to fight them. They battled their own reflection. They try to reduce your depth to something they can explain, package, and possess. But you're not an artifact. They cannot archive or market you. What lives in you is not for sale. When their strategies fail, they retreat to slander, painting you as unstable, too intense, too sensitive, anything to regain control of the narrative. But the story keeps slipping through their hands because people start noticing that your growth was real, your silence was strength, and your absence feels like balance resetting. The scaffolding they built on your back collapses, not because you retaliated, but because what you carried was never theirs to claim. Now they walk through days that feel unfamiliar, trying to replicate what only obedience earns. Their connections glitch, their clarity dissolves, they burn candles, repeat rituals, and chase answers that no longer arrive. What they don't grasp is the silence they mocked is now the silence that follows them. Not the quiet of peace, but of disconnection. While they struggle to recover control, you ascend, not through vengeance, but through unshakable alignment. You were never their accessory. You were the divine correction in disguise, not here to harm, but to hold the line. And now that you've walked away, the illusion dies, and the weight of truth remains. Their downfall isn't noise, it's what refuses to speak back.